In this one, we're going to be using Django sessions. What sessions allow you to do is store and retrieve data on a per site visitor basis. So what that also means is if you log in, you create a session, once you log out, it ends the session. But that's also true for users that are not logging in. If they just come to your site, they create a session, once they leave, the session can either end or we can set it to end after a certain amount of time. Now what's really good about this is we can store certain sort of variables that we might want to use in that session. For us, it's going to be the variable of cart ID or the cart itself. Because the cart, we want to allow them to have a persistent cart if they leave our site or come back. We want to make sure that that cart's still there, especially if they're not logged in. Now, if they're logged in, there's a lot of things that we could do to it to make sure that we have their cart information associated to that user. But if they're not logged in, that's the key part on how we're going to be doing this. So to do this, we want to come in here into our cart view and get our session variable or the cart ID itself. So cart ID is really what we're going to be using here. And we're going to set that equal to request.session.get, and we'll say cart_ID. And we'll say if cart ID is equal to none, equals to none, then we want to create a new cart. So we'll say cart or new cart equals to cart. And we'll just set the instance here and then new cart.save. Now, of course, those two lines are the same thing as doing cart.objects.create. Those are the exact same thing. But now, since we have this, we have a new cart ID. So new cart.id is something that exists because of any of these here. The save call, it creates a brand new cart in our database. So our request.session, we can now set a cart ID just like that. So that sets this cart ID. So now this will not ever be none. Instead, it will be an actual cart ID. So we'll do else the new cart or the cart itself is going to be equal to cart.objects.get or get ID equals to the cart ID. All right, so since we're doing this get call here, we're going to want to we can get rid of this altogether, that else clause, and set this stuff to being cart and cart, and then cart ID equals to cart.id, and then this could just be that. Cool. So now we have a cart here. So I'm going to get rid of this item. So this is actually setting a session variable cart. And we'll see what this does in just a second. So let's jump into our site here. And let's go ahead and add a new item into our cart. All right. And then we're going to go into the admin and look at carts. And we have this new item in here. 16 gigs, 200 came through, which is good. And now if we log out and go into cart and add, let's do a different one. Let's item 3 and quantity of 1. And then we'll do another one, cart item 4, quantity of 2. All right, so now let's go into the admin again, log in this time, go into carts, and now we have cart 5, and then we have 2 new things in here, and that's coming off of that new session because when we logged out, it ended that session and created a brand new one. Something else that's really cool here is we can set the session expiration. So to do that, just come in here and do request.session.setExpiry, and we do a number of milliseconds that we want to use. If you ever forget this, you can go to the Django documentation and to set expiry. So 300 milliseconds is 5 minutes. So if we did 300 milliseconds, that's going to be 5 minutes of how long this session is going to be. But instead, I'm going to just do 3. And we're going to refresh this and go back into the cart and item quantity. There we go. So really quickly, if I refresh the page in just a second, it's going to make me log in again. So I refresh, and now it makes me log in all over again to actually create this. That's how the session works. It just ended the session, and it will make me log in again. So this request session set expiry is really good for all sorts of things here. I'm sorry, I said milliseconds. It's actually in seconds. So 300 seconds is 5 minutes. And if you wanted it to be a lot longer, you could make it that way. But looking at the documentation, we see that if it's 0, the session will expire when the user's web browser is closed, which is kind of good. So that ends the session if they close the actual browser, which I kind of like that idea. So 0 is once they close the browser, it's going to just reset the session, assuming that they actually add something to the cart. If they don't add anything to the cart, it doesn't matter. So this is all about adding stuff to the cart. And the nice thing about this too is then that also means that our old carts are saved. So if we go into the admin and we log in again, we see the carts, we'll see these old carts that are actually coming through in here. So if I go to cart item, add another one, and then back into the admin, I see that I have a new cart in here and it's coming through. So the last thing that I want to do is the cart itself. I want to say if the user is authenticated, so if request.user.is authenticated, I should associate the user with the cart itself. So cart.user equals to request.user and cart.save. So if the user is authenticated, we might want to do one step further on this cart ID stuff. We might want to say that instead of saving the user automatically, maybe we might want to actually get the ID that's related to the request user, because it might change or something like that. But for us, either way, if the user's going to be authenticated, then we will save it just as is, because then that allows us to work with these carts in a different fashion. So if I add another item to the cart and go back into these carts, I can then see what carts are related to any particular user that's going to be logged in, which is important so we can understand our users a little bit better, especially if they're adding a ton of items to the cart but never actually buying anything or checking out completely. All right, so that's request sessions. If you have any questions on this, let us know. Otherwise, let's keep going.